Okay. Hi. Sean, are you ready for me to explain to you the wonderful, wonderful world of income inequality?
Sure.
Lyle, to begin with, for Sean's purpose and yours as well, we're going to define income inequality simply as the gap between the richest and poorest quintiles in the country. The gap between the richest and poorest quintiles in the country. We're going to use quintiles because most of the data is already separated into quintiles.
Okay. Wait, what's a quintile again? It's
A fifth. A fifth. So it'd be like 0% to 20%, 21 to 40, like that. Okay. And then now let's begin on the AF side. So the core of the AF case, Sean, is going to be comprised of a few different kind of warrants. Number one, it'll be comprised of a justice kind of an argumentation. The justice argumentation says this: the reason people can be billionaires and stuff is because they are exploiting the poor. The underlying assumption of the justice argument is that there is a finite amount of wealth that gets split up amongst people. Okay? So obviously, if there's a finite amount of wealth that gets split up amongst people, then it would make sense that it would be unfair for one person to have so much wealth and for some people to have so little.
Wait, just to make sure, the resolution is in the United States current income disparities threaten democratic ideals, right?
No.
Oh, that's an old one.
It's the one that says, to alleviate income inequality, the U.S. should prioritize spending on public infrastructure over spending on social welfare programs. So,
Okay. Wait, then.
So I'm sorry, when I said the app said it's a social justice issue, I meant the neg. I should have said the neg. Okay, I'm going to do the neg side first. The neg side's harder because you're arguing in favor of welfare against public infrastructure. So it's going to be harder because you're saying let's give the money away and get nothing in exchange for instead of hiring people to do stuff that's useful. So okay, on the neg then you're going to have to argue first of all through a framework of social justice, which means you're going to have to operate under the underlying assumption that there is a finite amount of wealth that gets split amongst the total population of people, which is how all the statistics tend to position it, okay? And in a resource-dependent economy, that is in fact the case. So if you have a resource-dependent economy, which is like Saudi Arabia or something, or to a certain extent Russia, what you have there is a circumstance in which oligarchs can easily control all of the resources. Why? Because the reason there's wealth in that country is because they're selling natural resources. If you sell a whole bunch of oil and you get a whole bunch of money, then it's easy for the oligarchs to keep that money for themselves. That essentially is plundering the land. It's plundering a nation's resources to serve only a few people. It's very, very different. I'm going to switch over to the AF side for a second here, and you're going to answer it like this. It's very, very different when you're a resource-dependent economy, how wealth gets divvied up, than if you're not a resource-dependent economy. Because in the United States, if Bill Gates invents Windows and makes a bunch of copies of Windows and sells it to everybody all around the world, he has not converted resources into money. He has instead created wealth because that thing that he's selling didn't exist before he made it, and it's not sold to be made into something else. So if I sell you all my whole forest and keep all the money myself and let none of the other people have any of the money around in my community, then that's a social justice issue, because there's no reason why that individual should be able to get all the profit from all the natural resources and other individuals get none of it. However, when you're talking about an advanced economy, very little of what the country does is directly related to converting raw materials into wealth directly. Okay, so, and to the extent that that is a part of the economy, the U.S. does at least a decent job of trying to make that process fair. So if we have publicly owned resources, it'll have an auction to utilize those resources. If we've got publicly owned grazing lands, then and you're a rancher and you want to use them, you have to bid and pay the federal government. Now, of course, the problem with this is that money doesn't actually end up back in the taxpayers' pockets. The exception being Alaska. Alaska mines a whole bunch, not mines. Alaska produces a bunch of oil, and they get a direct payment from the Alaskan state government each year as their cut of the oil revenue. And that's how it should be if you're going to be selling natural resources. Anyhow, regardless of that, what you're going to position it as, you're going to be talking about the other kind. You're going to be talking about the kind where you're selling natural resources and the oligarchs are keeping all the money. You're going to pretend the United States is that kind of economy. Now, I don't think other squads are going to necessarily make the distinction here between income disparities that are stemming from resource-dependent economic actions, and from versus those that are stemming from what you call intellectual economies. So, like the United States is more or less an intellectual economy, and the problem is that the intellectual economy sector is not large enough, and that's why we have things like a lot of people who are clamoring for a higher minimum wage, because there's a fairly large chunk of the economy is not that intellectual economy, which is to say that people rely on no particular knowledge or skills or utility that persists to make their money, or utility that persists or spreads. So, for example, what I'm doing right now is work. I'm teaching you, but you take this information, and it's unavoidable that it's going to spread to a certain extent, because people hear you in rounds, even if they're competing against you, they might pick up some of the things, blah, blah, blah. So it's got permanence and utility beyond, say, working a drive-through, putting a bag of burgers into your car. That's not going to be meaningful to anybody on any time scale whatsoever. It's not going to have any lasting impact on anything. So, you want to be in the intellectual economy part, because the jobs are better, the pay is better, and you're creating wealth rather than converting resources into wealth. Of course, you ultimately are converting resources into wealth in the process of creating wealth, because you're converting human resources, which is to say, you hire people and you're converting their time into wealth that you share with yourself and the people in the company. So that's the reality of that. But the point is, for the neg side, when you position it as income disparities that are stemming from the bad kind of wealth gathering, which is resource exploitation, direct natural resource exploitation, you pretend like it's all that. You just don't go into that topic at all, and you say, look, this is a social justice issue because the billionaires have exploited the environment. They've exploited the mass of the citizenry in order to get more than their fair share of the wealth from every single human being in this country. So if we were to take the total amount of wealth and divide it evenly, that's what it should be. And what you see is that this billionaire is basically robbing from 300 million people, 400 million people, and he needs to pay for that. So when I say we should have social welfare programs instead of jobs, it's simply a matter of we should not make people who've had their wealth and their fortune and their prospects stolen from them by unscrupulous corporations and businessmen, by unscrupulous billionaires who don't need any more money and get robbed from the average citizen anyway. We don't need to have those average citizens then have to get a job and work for the thief and say, oh, thief, you stole my $1,000, can I have it back? Well, yeah, once you do $1,000 worth of labor for me, well, then you're not getting your money back. There's no retribution aspect to it. What we need is reparations for the underclass that has been so horribly misused this whole last 50, 100 years, more even, since America was born. This country has favored an elite that has accumulated wealth at the expense of the poor, the expense of women, the expense of marginalized populations, and we must remedy that directly. It is unjust to demand that a person who's been exploited and had their wealth stolen from them work to get it back. So that's framework one for the neg, okay?
Is it on a card or anything? Or is it just...
Look,
yeah?
the thing is, what you're going to do is you're going to use the cards that we have that say how big the disparity is. You're going to use any cards we have of examples of corporations that do crazy, shitty, crappy stuff. Like, for example, when the Nestle Corporation went to South America and they sold breast formula, baby formula, like fake breast milk, basically. And they gave free samples away to all the women who were pregnant. And then the women used it for a couple weeks, but they gave a couple weeks worth of free samples. They used it for a couple weeks, not aware that it was going to cause their own milk to dry up. Their own milk then dried up, and then they had no choice but to buy more of Nestle's product because they had no natural means of feeding their baby. Now that's totally fucking evil. I mean, excuse my French, sorry. That's totally, totally evil. Those are the sort of things you want to cite as examples when you are neg. And you say, now you're saying that woman who was so horribly treated by this corporation should turn around and work for the corporation, building a road so that the corporate executives can drive more smoothly to work, while so that she can get a little bit of money from them so that she can survive and eat? No, I don't think so. You owe that woman like that, you know?
Oh wait, is that real though?
The story about the Nestle thing, I'm pretty sure it was Nestle. I don't know exactly the corporation, but the story is absolutely real. It did happen, and if you Google it and look into it, you'll find some stories about it. I'm pretty sure it's Nestle, but it could be a different corporation. But yeah, it definitely did happen. It was an American corporation, and it happened in South America. So, you know, somebody might say, well, that didn't even happen in the U.S., and you just say, well, it's an example of the kind of stuff that does happen, and unless you have some sort of evidence that it doesn't happen, this should be sufficient to win that particular element of this argument. And with that element of the argument, we win the point, and therefore we win the round. They're evil, and we shouldn't have to work for them to get our money back. Like that. So you're going to have to do a little research, and you're going to have to go through the cards we currently have and try to find some big number disparities, kind of evidentiary proof. Lacey, you better shut that mouth, dog. Disparity stuff, and yeah, that's it for that. Okay, time on this one.